need for reforms in the electoral process. India is a vibrant democracy with people electing their representatives at several levels, beginning from local bodies and panchayats to the parliament. Vice President M. Venkaiah Naidu has termed Indian experience with the democracy as a remarkable success story. However, he also pointed out two distortions which need to be addressed urgently, and those are the use of enormous money power in politics and elections and the increasing attempts to entice the voters with short-term benefits at the cost of long-term goals of basic amenities, infrastructure, quality education, healthcare, growth and job opportunities, etc. So what all has been done to tackle these two issues so far, and what more needs to be done in the future? For more on this, we're joined by a distinguished panel of guests. Let me first introduce the guest to you, beginning with Mr. S.K. Mehndiratta, former advisor to the Election Commission of India. We also have with us Mr. Ashok Tandon, senior journalist, and we're also joined by Mr. Sanjay Kumar, the director for the Center for Study of Developing Societies, and Dr. Jaiprakash Narayan, the General Secretary of Foundation for Democratic Reforms. Welcome all of you to Rajya Sabha TV studios. Let me begin with you, Mr. Tandon. This has been a long journey as far as Indian democracy is concerned, and it has been quite wonderful, with colorful as well. But the points which have been raised by the Vice President here, they've been alive for this entire journey. That is the use of money power as well as enticing voters. We call them freebies. And also, the third aspect is that of paid news.
See, first of all, I 100% agree with the Vice President that India is a vibrant democracy. We are a successful democracy, and the kind of problems we have, even then for the more than about 70 years, we have been having a very successful experiment with democracy, electoral politics also. But his concerns are also very genuine. The money power, in fact, the use of money power has been increasing over the years, even in the municipal election and state assembly election, and not to say about the Lok Sabha poll. But the question is, where does the remedy lie? I personally feel, number one, the stakeholders, the political parties will have to, rise on this occasion and try to, self-discipline. But I personally feel, my experience is that the people have been, in fact, rejecting all these things also. In spite of money power and freebies and other, the kind of inducement being given to electorate, in many elections we have seen people have rejected that. But unfortunately, in spite of the people rejecting all those things, the political parties continue to compete with each other on these issues, which is very unfortunate. I think the legislation will not do.
Okay.
Any number of amendments to the Representation of People Act or the stringent code being evolved by the Election Commission in successive elections has actually failed to a great extent. So because now we are debating within our own country, we can say that, well, we have a very vibrant democracy. It has taken roots, but quite a lot needs to be done as far as electoral reforms are concerned. And I fully agree with the Vice President's contention. Number one, if we can have simultaneous polls, we can certainly reduce the expenditure. But if it is not possible in immediate future, then at least political parties should realize this. But final verdict, I still believe, remains with the people, and people have rejected, whether it is a state assembly election or even in Lok Sabha election. They have risen above all these, whatever the things have been offered to them. Whether it is in form of government advertisement, there is a spurt in government advertisement, claiming achievements, but people have rejected, and anti-incumbency of the governments have worked in spite of the advertisement, plus freebies, which many states, in many states we have seen political parties have offered, people have rejected that. So I think we need to educate the people not to, be influenced by all these things, but have their own judgment and reject those political parties which indulge in all these malpractices. But still, I feel a lot more needs to be done. Whether any central legislation will help
Okay.
we must consider that.
Okay, so these are different aspects and all stakeholders will have to be involved. It's the people ultimately who have the power. Let me bring in Mr. Sanjay Kumar here. Mr. Sanjay Kumar, in terms of statistics, if we look at these two issues and these two problems, that's the use of money power as well as the other aspect, how serious or how bad is the situation when we look at the electoral politics?
You have mentioned about two issues, money power in politics and the freebies. But we are still missing another important issue, which is about the criminals in politics. So that should also be added to the list.
Okay.
Money power in politics, it is such a big issue. We have been debating this issue for such a long time. The question that is it an issue should not even be raised. That is it an issue in Indian election? This is a big issue. The whole problem is that there is a lot of black money which comes into play when elections take place, and the candidates try to contest against each other, compete against each other with the power of money. So this is a big issue, and there have been lots of commissions, lots of committees which have been set up by the government, by the Election Commission to look into this matter. But the committees give their recommendation, but nothing has come out. No changes have taken place on the ground. So that this is a very serious issue. We keep debating, politicians keep debating, we keep debating.
Okay.
But I think finally the government has to, I think the onus lies on the political parties, because they have to come up with strong legislation on these issues.
Okay. And the freebies aspect, if you look at that, because that is something which has taken deep roots. We see in every election, almost all political parties across the board resorting to that particular tactic in one way or the other.
So that's another problem along with the money power, and that is also related to money power, because if political parties are engaging in distributing freebies, you also need money for distributing freebies. So that has compounded the problem of money power in politics. This freebies has actually multiplied the problem of money power in politics. But freebies, if all political parties are engaged in the, in distributing freebies to the voters, it actually cancels out each other. In a sense, every voter has just one vote. And if there are 5 political parties or 3 political parties, every political party is offering something or the other to the voter. Voter has just one vote. He makes a judgment based on other issues, not only based on what he has got from the political parties.
Okay.
But yes, I can say that these are neutralizing each other, but it is a big problem. It is. I do recognize that this is a big problem.
Okay. Okay. Let me bring in Dr. Jayaprakash Narayan here. Dr. Narayan, from your perspective, these two issues, and one mentioned by Mr. Sanjay Kumar as well, that is the issue of criminalization of the electoral politics and also the paid news. So if you look at all these 3-4 issues, this seems quite a bunch of work as far as bringing in electoral reforms is concerned.
Vishal, if you club them all, it becomes very complicated and messy. We have to segregate them. There are 3 drivers of expenditure in politics. The first is legitimate electioneering cost and party running cost. After all, if a democracy has to run, if politics is a noble endeavor, we have to find mechanisms to fund it. In 2003, the then NDA government, with the unanimous consent of Parliament, enacted a pretty decent law, in my opinion. After the Tehelka scam, I had quite a bit to do with that. I persuaded the political parties across the spectrum. And ultimately, by unanimous consent, the law was enacted by which political contributions to parties will receive 100% tax exemption for the donor, individuals or corporates, with certain caveats. The second, the full TV airtime is available, private or government channels, all electronic media, free airtime is available to parties, recognized political parties, by law. The second part is not implemented, unfortunately. If that is implemented, a lot of modern, genuine electioneering costs will be met already. The legal framework is available. The first one is being implemented, but there are a couple of problems. One is what you mentioned, the paid news. That's something, frankly, I did not anticipate at the time. That's something that came up later on at the end of that decade of 2007, 2008, 2009, around that period. We have to address it as a media issue challenge. The second is the secret bonds. The bearer bonds, which by definition give secrecy to the donor, are fundamentally antithetical to democratic politics. And I know why the government brought it in. Mr. Arun Jaitley several times told me what happened. He was the law minister when this law was enacted. We collaborated a great deal in this law. he told me what happened. When BJP tried to collect money only by legitimate contribution of check, suddenly the contributions fell by 90%. The government had that in mind because there is still a fear that if I fund a political party, there will be retribution from other political parties.
Okay.
Therefore, the government felt secrecy is needed. But my view is the remedy is worse than the disease. We have to figure out other mechanisms to ensure that there is no retribution and yet there is transparent funding so that people understand what is the source of money if there is a quid pro quo.
Okay.
But in my judgment, the larger issue of legitimate campaign funding is a relatively minor one in India because already framework exists. We have to only fix some of the kinks. But the real challenges are two. The first major challenge is the parties are forced to bear an enormous burden of maintaining a vast machine to act as intermediaries between the citizen and the local bureaucracy. Only because the local bureaucracy is not efficient or accountable or responsive. Now we are paying salaries to them. People are paying taxes for them. And they are expected to get the services.
Okay.
And yet, we require a party machine. And why are we putting the burden on the political parties? Now, a ballpark calculation indicates in an assembly constituency, typically, the indirect cost is not a direct cost of expenditure in cash, but the burden imposed on the party workers, most of whom are poor and have no other livelihood, 200 to 500 workers in every assembly constituency, round the year, throughout the period between the elections. The annual burden of maintaining that constituency indirectly on the party workers is about 3 to 4 crores per year.
Okay.
Per assembly constituency. Now, in return, the party workers must get something because they're poor. They get contracts, petty contracts. They get police cases intervention. They get paper shop dealerships. And the whole the administrative process is abused. The parties are forced into that. We have to address that challenge by simply improving the delivery of services, decentralizing, making bureaucracy accountable. But the real challenge we have to address now is vote buying. Now, I agree with, I think, Sanjay, who said that vote buying does not necessarily distort the outcome. Yes, because all the major players are giving money, it seems to be neutralized. But there is a fundamental flaw in that logic. It has become an entrance fee. Vote buying does not guarantee victory. But if you don't distribute money, it guarantees defeat because you're not seen as a viable candidate.
Okay.
Therefore, the whole political process is distorted.
Okay.
If you simply go by the results of elections, which are themselves flawed, because of vote buying and plutocracy, we get a completely wrong conclusion.
Okay. Let me, Mr. Narayan, let me bring in Mr. Mendiratta here. And, from the Election Commission's point of view, all those points which Mr. Mendiratta is making, those seemingly point towards the entire issue of the funding aspect as well as how the money is spent and that particular money, how it comes, and then the utilization of that money as well. Then that revolves in circles and it vitiates the entire, structure.
No, actually, there are certain flaws in the laws. And just to think that the political parties will themselves do something, put their own self-restraint, I don't agree with that one. Because if you leave it to the political parties, they will just be going on competing. They will say if they are spending this much, showing this much TV advertisements, we have also to match, even if they may not be able to ultimately because of the insufficiency.
It's a competitive electoral politics.
Yeah. But question is, there is a big flaw. What I feel is, in our electoral laws, there is a limit on the election expenses of the candidates. But there is no limit on the election expenses of the political parties. So political parties are free, and then they can do anything. They can canvass, they can campaign for their candidates, and the candidates will say, I have spent only this small amount. And though from our experience we have seen, though the limit for a political party, for a candidate in a parliamentary constituency is 70 lakhs and 28 lakhs for an assembly. What the returns the candidates file, they will show only nearly 50%.
Okay, so you're saying that the political parties also need to be held accountable, and there should be a limit there as well.
Yeah, there should be some limit fixed on the political parties' expenditure.
Okay.
And whatever amount they may collect, but if there is some limit on the expenditure of those parties,
To be spent in a particular election.
yeah, then in that case, it may bring some level playing field.
Okay. Okay, Mr. Tandon, this particular aspect which Mr. Mediratta is saying, and something which Mr. Narayan pointed out in terms of the money which is collected by the political parties via donation, and there are different methods. Now it's electoral bonds as well. And that, question of secrecy, because Mr. Narayan pointed out the aspect of fear of retribution. So all these things do point out to certain gaps which needs to be filled.
Certainly. But the question is, who will bell the cat? Here, political parties are the stakeholders. And they, when they come to power, whether in a state or at the center, they are supposed to be doing something as far as legislation is concerned. But since it's very convenient for all political parties to continue with this kind of system, nobody is really serious about it. Now, I personally would feel that even the limit fixed by the law for expenditure of the candidate itself is not rational.
Okay.
Look at the kind of inflation we have and the size of the country and the size of the constituency, although the limit has been increased gradually, but even today it is not rational. Secondly, I agree with Ms. Mediratta that there should be some check on the spending of the political parties also. There should be audit by the political parties. But who will do that? You can't do it. Election Commission also can't do it as far as political parties are concerned. So I think although we are a successful parliamentary democracy, but if we continue with this kind of all malpractices, I think we are somewhere undermining our own democratic process. And if it is undermined, people start losing faith in a parliamentary system, then ultimately the losers will be the political parties.
Okay.
So therefore, I think it's a very right time, and I am glad that the Vice President highlighted this issue at the time when there is no election pending, apart from the election in Delhi, where a huge amount of money is being spent on the government advertisement, although it will stop now because there is code of conduct. But I think the entire public was watching the kind of spending by the Aam Aadmi Party government in Delhi. It was totally out of proportion because their own budget is so limited. But then there is no check on that. So I think there should be, the gap should be filled, if necessary, through a legislation. There should be restrictions. But my fear is that if we don't do anything, if we don't ponder over the concerns expressed by the Vice President, we all will be held guilty by the future generation if the democratic process is undermined. We are gradually undermining our democratic process by spending huge amount of money and other things. Liquor, there is no rationale for liquor being seized during election.
That's enticing voters again.
Exactly.
Those
so
are the
all
questions.
these things, I think we all Indians have to do something. And I think the best course is for the people to reject those candidates who spend money, reject those candidates who have criminal background, and also defeat those political parties who try to, woo the voters through money or entice through other freebies.
Okay, let me bring in Sanjay here. Sanjay, your views on, the suggestions which are made by Mr. Mediratta here, and as Mr. Tandon is saying, that people will also have to be, educated and aware and take those drastic step of rejecting such kind of candidates or political parties. But again, the moot question is that the stakeholders here, the largest stakeholders, are the political parties themselves. So the big question, who bells the cat?
Yes, it is very easy to say, people needs to be educated. But look at, the gaps in the legislation. And there was a discussion about there is no cap on the spending of political parties. Who prevents political parties from enacting a legislation that there should be a cap on spending of political parties?
Okay.
You have a law that the candidates cannot spend more than X amount of money. So where does people come in this? So we can keep saying people needs to be educated, people should reject those candidates who are spending money. The problem is that everybody is spending money, and we should not forget that in an Indian system of parliamentary democracy where elections are contested on party symbols, so people actually vote for party. The identity question has become so strong that people ask the people for 2024 election. I think half of the people, more than half, 60% of the voters are ready to tell you which party they are likely to vote for in 2024.
Okay.
They are not looking at the candidates. So expecting people to reject the candidates who is spending money on freebies or who have a criminal background is expecting too much, because in the parliament, in the party-based democracy, people are actually choosing.
Okay.
Lots of voters are choosing the party. They are not choosing the candidate.
Okay, Mr. Narayan, Mr. Jaiprakash Narayan, from your point, in terms of the solutions to this, we will have to try and identify what needs to be done. So, from your point of view, what is it that needs to be done right now? Because the stakeholders out here are the political parties and obviously the people also.
Great question. First of all, Vishal, I reject the notion that the parties are the villains. Parties and politicians respond to incentives. You give them a certain design, a certain structure, a certain incentive, and then they respond in a certain manner. If you don't alter the incentives, merely blaming them, it indicates that all of us in India are wonderful people and those in politics are all scoundrels. It's an absurd notion in a democracy. There is a certain process. And second, I entirely agree with Sanjay to assume that somehow the people will suddenly become wise overnight in a largely illiterate country without local governments, with abject poverty. That's an absurd notion. It's an evolution.
Okay, so how do we go about it?
Let me come to that. First is, the ceilings business to me is not really much of a relevant issue, because all the ceilings issue you're talking about is only about the accounted and legitimate expenditure, which is a small part of the actual spend in elections and in politics. Therefore, you do whatever you like. There are questionable issues. There are some people who say no ceilings, some people say ceilings, but to me, that's really not a big issue. It's a red herring.
Okay.
Therefore, what is the thing that we should do? In the long term, there's one approach, but because we can't afford for the long term, we have to look at another approach. Long term, let me briefly mention.
Ji.
Only when the citizen understands the value of the vote, and that happens not by preaching, but by localizing power and the people seeing the consequences of their electoral decisions immediately and in a tangible, personal manner. We have centralized power and there's no link between vote and consequences in a tangible manner. That's why the freebies. Because there's nothing much happening, let me get something tangible, the money I get, rather than the long-term goods that the public goods that the Vice President talked about today. So, but this is a long-term approach. First of all, we have not empowered local governments. They're very weak in India, no matter what we claim.
Okay.
Second, even if we do it today, it will take at least 4 or 5 electoral cycles for this to manifest itself. We missed the bus. We should have done it 50 years ago, 70 years ago. Even though we should do it, but that will not yield results. Therefore, the real answer in the lies in what Sanjay mentioned. The people are voting not for a candidate. People are voting for a leader or a party. If that is the case, when already the voting is that manner, constitutionally we are electing the government through the MLAs, because typically the challenge is state level. Because governance of India, political crisis of India is at the state level. The national level is merely a derivative one. The real politics is at the state level.
Okay.
Therefore, if you elect the government directly, the leader is elected directly by the people, to a large extent the pressure to find money bags, fund the local voters because of local constituency winning will reduce significantly in the desire to win the overall vote with the stature of the candidate, with the credibility of the candidate and the agenda and the past record. Second is you formalize the party vote, namely vote for the party and go for proportional representation so that the share of the vote is translated into seats. With certain that the fragmentation is not there, we can have high thresholds so that there is no instability. We can give bonus suits to the leading parties. So
okay, Dr. Narayan. But these are very important suggestions coming in there as well. And I'm sorry I have to cut you in there because we are running short of time here. But as our panelists have pointed out, there are a number of solutions. There are a number of suggestions. What is required is that all the stakeholders will need to put their heads together and try and find answers to these big questions when you talk about electoral reform.